So what do you do if you have a spouse who just refuses to sign your divorce papers? Are you stuck? I'm Karen Covey. I'm a divorce advisor, attorney, mediator, and coach. And today I want to talk about how you can deal with the situation when your spouse just refuses to sign off on the paperwork. And let me start by just saying and acknowledging how frustrating this is, because when you want a divorce and your spouse doesn't, and he or she is dragging their feet and throwing roadblocks in your way, it's incredibly frustrating. And unfortunately, it happens all the time. So what do you do if that's the situation that you're in? How do you deal with that? Well, step number one is you identify the problem. Here's what I mean. You could have a spouse who refuses to participate in your divorce at all. In other words, they just say, I'm not getting divorced and you can't make me. That's one situation. The second situation is where your spouse actually has participated in the divorce up to a certain point, but then they just won't sign off on the final paperwork, and you want to tear your hair out because you've gotten all this way and now nothing's happening, right? Those are two different problems. So step number one is identifying which one of those problems you've got. Step number two is trying to figure out as best you can what is your spouse's motivation. In other words, why won't they sign? Why won't they participate? And there can be a lot of different reasons, and we'll talk about a few of them, but understand there can be a lot of different reasons why they won't sign. Step number three is, what is the timing of this whole thing? Here's what I mean by that. It makes a big difference whether your spouse is dragging his or her feet in the beginning of your divorce or at the end of your divorce. They signal very, very different problems, very different motivations for the most part, and you might have a different approach or solution depending on where you're at in the divorce process. So let's talk about a couple of examples because that'll make this a little more concrete. Let's say you've got the spouse who just says, I'm not getting a divorce and you can't make me. They're not going to participate at all. What do? Well, again, now that you know what the problem is, they won't participate. You go to step number two and ask yourself, why? What's their reason? And you also, as you're going through step number two, be aware of step number three. Where are you at in the divorce process? Here's what I mean. Let's say they're just saying, no, I don't want a divorce. I'm not going to divorce you. If you just told them that you want a divorce last week or yesterday, of course they're going to be fighting you. Of course they're in shock. Of course they're trying to get their feet on the ground. They're in denial. That's a normal part of the grieving process. In the very, very beginning, if you've just told them a few days ago or maybe even a week or two ago that you want a divorce, it's normal for them to fight you on that. So your response in that circumstance may be just to give them a little bit more time so that they can adapt and adjust to the new reality that they're facing. On the other hand, if they're saying, no, I'm not going to let you divorce me. This is not going to happen. And you moved out a year ago and you've been separated for a year and you really want to get on with your life. That's a different problem. Now their reaction is not part of the normal grieving process. Now there's something more going on. And so you need to take a different approach. In that circumstance, perhaps a stronger approach. So maybe at that point you say to them, look, I understand that you don't want to divorce me, but we're getting divorced. Because the truth is, in America right now, you can make a divorce take longer, you can make it cost more, but you can't stop it. So the fact that your spouse won't participate doesn't change the fact that you're going to get a divorce. So maybe your spouse doesn't realize that, so maybe your next step is to talk to an attorney, have the lawyer give them a call or send them a letter and say, guess what? I've been hired by your spouse. Here's divorce papers. You have X amount of time to file a response or get a lawyer, or I'm going to send the sheriff to serve you. Or the lawyer may take it a step further and actually have the sheriff serve your spouse with papers. And then if your spouse ignores the court summons, now there are going to be legal ramifications for their failure to respond, for their failure to participate. Now, that having been said, getting a divorce from a reluctant spouse, does that take longer? Probably. Does it cost more? Probably. But can you do it? Definitely. So it just depends on you identifying what you want, knowing what's the problem, what's your spouse's motivation, and where you're at in the process. But let's talk, because we haven't really talked a lot about your spouse's motivation. Why won't they participate in your divorce? Like I said, maybe it's because they think that if they don't participate, you can't get a divorce. Well, then your answer is a little bit of an education. But if they're saying, I'm not going to participate because I just don't want this and I refuse to participate, that's a different motivation, so it gets a different level of response. Make sense? Okay, so that's if your spouse won't participate at all. But what happens if your spouse has participated in the divorce up to a point, it's now time to either settle this case or go to trial, and they're just saying, they either won't respond to your settlement proposal or they won't sign off on the settlement paperwork that you made. What gives with that? What do you do then? Well, in that circumstance, you're dealing with something different than that they don't want the divorce at all. I mean, they may not want it still. That might be part of their motivation. But another part of their motivation may be that they just don't like the deal that you gave them. And then that kicks the ball back into your court to say either, no, this is the deal, take it or leave it, and if you don't like it, we're going to go to trial. Or you could say, all right, here, have A, B, and C more, and let's just get this done, right? So you can have a different response based upon what you think, but you're not letting them stall the process indefinitely. You are moving forward by taking action. Either you're changing the deal and giving them something else to consider, or you're going to your lawyer and saying, we need a trial date. Because here's how the divorce system works. No matter who you are, where you're at, right? Ultimately, if your spouse doesn't participate or won't sign the final papers, either one, ultimately the judge will set a trial date. And the judge will make a decision. If you and your spouse can't present the court with an agreement, the judge will make a decision and you will get divorced. So ultimately your spouse can't stop you, but how the divorce happens and how the process goes is going to depend on whether they're going along with it or not. So I hope that cleared up some questions. I hope it maybe gave you some ideas for how to handle the situation if your spouse won't sign off on the paperwork. If you liked the video, give it a thumbs up and subscribe, and I'll talk to you next time.